If I were to leave a digital footprint, this is gonna be it. This is it. I'm doing it. Hey guys. Hi. Darius here. I've decided to create this channel and mainly treat it as a form of self-expression. This is my outlet to share some of my ideas, some of my worries, anxieties, thoughts that I have. As if we need another white girl's like opinion out here on the internet, but hey, it's 2025. I feel like everyone's doing it. And as stated earlier, I want to treat it as a video diary, just a form of my self-expression. The first video that I want to put out here, I want to dedicate it to my 15-year-old sister, who I deeply love and cherish. However, recently, I think primarily I've been spiraling, and I've noticed something that kept bugging me and kept disturbing me, and I'd like to share some of my thoughts and opinions about the current rise of, well, I think it's been on the rise for a minute actually, but the rise of old money aesthetic, traditional wife trend. And the reason why I'm dedicating this to my sister is because I'm offering like an older sibling perspective, right? This video is a video letter to her. I don't live with my sister anymore. We don't live together. Moreover, we have a 9-year age gap. And as much as she claims to be a part of Gen Z, she still says that, oh, I'm part of your generation. I'm like, Tumblr did not mean the same thing. Like, it doesn't mean the same thing it does for me, okay? So, hold your horses. The reason why I have this concern and am a little bit obsessed is the wrong word, but I guess preoccupied with the rise of, or maybe not even the rise, because I feel like old money aesthetic has been ongoing for quite a while, but rather this resurgence of this aesthetic, this traditional wife, traditional gender roles trends, right? All of them is because how alluring, attractive, and seductive they appear to be. And what I would like to discuss in this video is obviously the whole trend, but also share some of my anxieties that I have about my sister's generation, about my sister, and just talk with you guys through this. And hopefully, maybe it'll create a discussion and a conversation. I'd love to hear your opinions and ideas in the comments down below. Also, I feel like this video is a little bit, like, as much as I have my notes here, I feel like I'm gonna go off script because it's a little bit easier for me. Also, apologies for the lighting. We're doing what we can. I will sit here and enjoy the sun because where I live, we don't get a lot of sun, okay? Without further ado, let's get into this video. Let's get into this discussion. Why am I so bothered by the current trends, by this particular aesthetic? Well, I think my primary concern is with the media in general. I'm not gonna sit out here and say, well, the internet is bad, scrolling on TikTok and Instagram or whatever is gonna rot our brains, and we got brain rot, our attention spans, they're declining, we're doing really poorly here. Surely. I don't know, there are studies that support that this isn't the main focus of the video. These claims I'm not gonna address, okay? I think my main issue is how the internet sort of doesn't just provide us and feed us with information, it generates this desire and redefines, obviously, like beauty standards, surely, but certain aesthetics, like for instance, old money aesthetic, traditional wife looks, they're very seductive and they're very, very alluring. Not to say like, oh, I was a victim of this trend, but I'm not gonna lie to you. When I first re-downloaded TikTok, because I have like an on and off relationship with social media, I re-downloaded TikTok and it started popping up on my feed, right? And I was like, oh, this looks beautiful. This looks pretty. You know, I enjoy what I'm seeing. It kind of like most people can relate to this probably when we do all of these like tests. We're trying to like categorize ourselves. We're trying to not like place ourselves in the box, but like, oh my god, I want to do this this personality test. I want to know what I am. I want to discover. I want to like test myself. I feel like aesthetics, especially when they pop up on our feed like on TikTok or Instagram reels and you just like scroll by, you're like, oh my god, this is kind of actually pretty. Wow. When I first saw old money aesthetic, right, I was like, I kind of like what I'm seeing. I'm enjoying this style. I'm enjoying whatever's going on here. I feel like I want to be a part of it. What should like I incorporate to align with these, no values, but at least I was very captivated by the picture that I saw online. I didn't even question what sort of values and what sort of ideologies or political meanings can be behind this aesthetic. I just enjoyed seeing the picture. I enjoyed it. And you know, I can't really explain why I was so attracted to it, but I would like to explore what kind of hidden ideologies or political statements this aesthetic might reinforce. So remember how I said like the internet generates desires, redefines beauty standards. I think old money aesthetic and this rise of even not just this aesthetic and traditional wife values, but the whole conservatism, dare I say, because there are a lot of brands that used to sell not so modest clothing, you know. Now they're rebranding themselves to try to appeal to a more traditional gender roles, norms, values. They're rebranding themselves to be more, to appear more modest, right? That's like another factor that really feeds and adds into this, not argument, but rather it's an observation of mine that I made while I was online. And mind you, aesthetics are never neutral. That's another thing that I think is important to point out. They subtly reinforce political and ideological values while masking them as personal choices, right? And old money aesthetic in particular exhibits this sort of ease, portrays this easy lifestyle. It usually depicts a heterosexual relationship where a woman is a mother, a stay-at-home mom, and her man, her husband, is the breadwinner. He puts the food on the table. And they live this, I want to say, aristocratic lifestyle. They are very wealthy, old money aesthetic specifically. It sort of implies and hints about things that happened in the past, right? What is it? What is old about it? Oh, well, things in the past, they've been really nice. It sort of glamorizes and romanticizes the past. This aesthetic appears to be very seductive when you first examine it, right? When you first encounter it, it sort of frames these traditional gender roles and norms as very aspirational, as desirable, rather than oppressive, rather than bad. Old money aesthetic creates a sense of nostalgia about the past, about these gender roles that existed in our society before. And there's a danger to that, basically, all I want to say. Nostalgia is a very interesting subject to dive into. I'm not gonna go over it much, but I would like to say the following though. Nostalgia was first coined in, I think, at the end of 1600s, maybe the beginning of like 1700s. And it was first explored by this like Swiss doctor who referred to it as an incurable disease. It's this melancholic, apathetic sense, dreaming about the times that happened in the past, about the past, but in a very like romantic way. I would like to read a couple of following quotes from The Future of Nostalgia by Svetlana Boym. I love this book, but we're gonna just use her introduction. Svetlana Boym writes, "Nostalgia is a longing for a place, but actually it is a yearning for a different time. The time of our childhood, the slower rhythm of our dreams. In a broader sense, nostalgia is a rebellion against the modern idea of time, the time of history and progress. The nostalgic desires to obliterate history and turn it into a private or collective mythology, to revisit time like space, refusing to surrender to the irreversibility of time that plagues the human condition. It is the promise to rebuild the ideal home that lies at the core of many powerful ideologies of today, tempting us to relinquish critical thinking for emotional bonding. The danger of nostalgia is that it tends to confuse the actual home and the imaginary one." How does old money aesthetic relate to nostalgia? Well, as I've mentioned earlier, I feel like old money creates this nostalgic feel about the past. And as Svetlana Boym wrote, nostalgia is a sort of weapon that's used to, and again, quote unquote, that tempts us to relinquish critical thinking for emotional bonding. The trad wife ideal can create a quote unquote phantom homeland, this ideal home, an imagined version of domesticity and gender roles that is offered as a cure to contemporary anxieties about modernity and progress. Basically, using nostalgia as a weapon, appealing to a longing for a simpler, idealized past. But what is there to be worried about, you may ask me? Why these traditional roles are bad? Why did I call them oppressive even? Well, how do I put it? There's a lot to cover. First thing that I'd like to tap into is probably going to be the economical part of this discussion, the economics of it all. Primarily the fact that whatever is romanticized nowadays as this ease of life, as this idealized past, glamorized version of whatever was going on at the time. Oh, men were earning money and women didn't have to work and they stayed at home and life seemed to be so easy. That's just all fantasies. That's all fairy tales, basically. If we look into history and facts and actually examine things how they were, what they used to be, things were quite different when we look at what time of our lives or what specifically was going on at that historical time, right? I'm not gonna dive into that, but I'd like to examine the economical, not plateau, but the economical position, the economical situation of that time, right? Of what old money aesthetic necessarily tries to glamorize. So, traditional wife, a stay-at-home mother, what's the danger with that? Why is it not so good, in my personal opinion? Here, I'd like to read Kristen R. Ghodsee. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but this is from the book, and I know it's a very, um, not clickbaity, but kind of a catchy name, but it's called Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. In the chapter, I believe it's 4, but it's titled Capitalism Between the Sheets. The author writes, when women lack direct or easy access to resources such as political influence, healthcare, money, education, and jobs, then sex becomes a crucial means by which women can gain access to a good life. And so it is vital to female self-interest to keep the price of sex high. Women do this by reducing the supply, no more casual sex, which drives the price up. It's according to a similar logic that, for a certain group of extreme social conservatives, the only way to make America great again is to abolish birth control and abortion, while ensuring that women have few economic opportunities to pay for basic goods outside of selling their sex. Sexual economics theory assumes an underlying capitalist economy in which women have an asset, sex, they can choose to sell or give away either as sex workers or in less overt but no less transactional ways, as sugar babies, girlfriends, or wives. In order to meet their basic needs, food, shelter, healthcare, education, they must either sell their sex or earn money to pay for these resources another way. You know, the rise of economic precarity, because we live in a very transitional and very challenging times, a lot of things are going on in the world that are quite disturbing. This rise of economic precarity in our modern society can make these traditional gender roles appear to be a safe alternative to the instability of modern life. The tradwife ideal promises security in exchange for reinforcing these traditional gender roles, right? However, I believe Ghodsee's analysis, these quotes that I read, demonstrates how a lack of economic freedom forces women into reliance on their sexual identity for access to resources, which conservatives exploit by pushing for limited economic opportunities for women. So these conservative movements, old money aesthetic, traditional wife, traditional husband trend, they push for policies. They sort of push for, they force women into economic dependence. And these policies make the traditional model of femininity, which is where a woman is dependent on a male breadwinner, seem like a return to safety and stability. Whereas, as Kristen R. Ghodsee, as the author of this book, pointed out, it's other way around. I really do hope you can see my vision, how old money aesthetic and traditional wife ideal, they're put together and they sort of reinforce and they perpetuate this cycle of economic dependence. They hint at it subtly. One might find this aesthetic appealing, like it, enjoy it, and think that this is a great way to go about life. But rather, as shown in this book, economic instability, economic precarity can force women, or rather deprive them from all the choices, reduce their number of choices, reduce their pathways, and tie them to marriage, tie them to being a stay-at-home mom. And then there's another author who I would like to, another scholar who I would like to also bring into this discussion and read certain quotes from their most recent book, Who's Afraid of Gender. This is by Judith Butler. I think certain quotes from introduction also align with what I'm worried about with this, what we've been discussing so far. Judith Butler writes, "Can we even say how many contemporary fears gather at the sight of gender? Or explain how the demonization of gender deflects from and covers over legitimate anxieties about climate destruction, intensified economic precarity, war, environmental toxins, and police violence, fears we are surely right to feel and think about? When the word gender absorbs an area of fears and becomes a catch-all phantasm for the contemporary right, the various conditions that actually give rise to those fears lose their names. Circulating the phantasm of gender is also one way for existing powers, state, churches, political movements to frighten people to come back into their ranks, to accept censorship, and to externalize their fear and hatred onto vulnerable communities. As a consequence, circulating the idea of gender's destructive powers is one way to produce existential fear that can then be exploited by those who want to enhance state powers with the hopes of returning to a secure patriarchal order. The project of restoring the world to a time before gender promises a return to a patriarchal dream order that may never have existed, but that occupies the place of history or nature, an order that only a strong state can restore." Here's my thinking process, right? I want to elaborate on my thinking process and explain why I think these quotes are sort of linked and how they support not the argument that I'm making, but rather my observations, right? So, for instance, old money aesthetic romanticizes and glamorizes the past, traditional gender roles and norms, creates this nostalgic feeling about it. Svetlana Boym wrote that, well, nostalgia can be quite dangerous because it sort of reduces our ability to critically think. Rather, we put our emotions at the forefront and we think, we feel with our emotions. And it sort of creates this, what Judith Butler referred to as phantasm, basically an illusion, a fantasy, distorting the past, distorting the real past, how things have happened before. And that's how people start to romanticize, glamorize this past, these traditional gender norms and roles within our case that we're looking at, right? It's because they think, oh, things were actually really good. In times off, all of these anxieties that Judith Butler mentioned, these anxieties are not addressed, they're suppressed and redirected, and our attention is redirected to this current aesthetic, to this current, oh, but things were better in the past. If we restore them, if we restore these traditional gender roles and norms, things will be better. Things will go back to what they used to be. The problem is that they will never be like they used to be. It is impossible to restore just because we're gonna implement these traditional gender roles or maybe like enforce these traditional gender roles. Things will never be like they used to because we don't live in the same time frame anymore. We've discovered, we've learned, we have the internet, we have so many new developments and things that can never truly replicate the exact picture of what things used to be. And this promise that things will be easier, it will never be fulfilled. It's just a political ideology that conservative movements, they use to just redirect our attention towards something that might appear appealing, might appear good and safe. And as Kristen Ghodsee, I hope it's the way, I am not really sure, but the author of the book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, as they pointed out, things weren't that great, actually. Women were deprived of their economical independence. And this is bad, to say the least, because women were forced to, their choices were limited. They were forced to, quote unquote, sell their body in a more overt ways through marriage, right? Through being a wife, being a girlfriend, in exchange for the goods, in exchange for the goods, in exchange for the safety, right? I wrote the following. The tried-wife ideal isn't just a personal choice, right? It's a part of a broader ideological push to reestablish patriarchal control under the guise of preserving family values and social stability. Gender is politicized to distract from real social problems, creating a false binary of traditional versus modern that traps women in restrictive roles. And now I'm going to tie this all back and explain as to why I've decided to make this video in the first place. What is it that I'm worried about? Well, as you can probably guess, as you can probably deduce or conclude, is I'm worried because my sister is a teenager on the internet. And when I was a teenager on the internet, I guess I didn't even get to think how all these trends do affect me. And when adults try to explain this to me, my first initial thought at the time, but that was just me, I pushed back and said, well, of course adults are going to criticize the internet. Of course they're going to say this is something that's going to rot our brains or whatever. And I don't want to deny my sister's agency. I don't want to be the one who's going to say, oh, because I'm older and she's younger, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't know what she's doing. No, not at all. But I just would like to point out that not only teenagers are definitely vulnerable to this media, to this exposure of whatever internet culture presents, but there are adults who can be vulnerable too. People of all ages can be vulnerable to whatever's going on the internet, because the way marketing, the way algorithm, I can't pronounce that word, but the way algorithm works, it's just so dangerous. It can subtly reinforce these ideologies, these values, and place them upon us, and we might not even notice it, you know? This is what I'm trying to say. And of course, it's based on my personal observations, and this is through my own prism and perspective. But I am worried that this particular trend that my sister might find appealing and might not even question and might just think, oh, but I love this aesthetic. Because you know what? I did too. When I first saw it, I was that person who was like, oh my God, I kind of like what I'm seeing. But if she sees it and decides to follow this path and decides to embody it, well, for starters, I don't want to be the one telling her not to do that. I don't want to be this person, as I said earlier, an adult, an older person who's like, no, don't do that, that's bad. But for selfish reasons, I feel like this is going to drive us apart. And I'm scared. Scared of drifting apart from my sister, us drifting apart. Not losing her, obviously, but I feel like this traditional wife narrative might shape my sister's view of womanhood in a different way, in a way that doesn't necessarily align with mine, which is fine. I wouldn't want us to not stop talking, but just disappear from each other's lives, you know? These values that old money aesthetic embodies, if my sister decides to implement them and follow them, once again, that's okay that they're not going to align with my view of womanhood. But I don't want this to be a driving force, a force that drives us apart, rather. Because I feel like this traditional wife lifestyle, old money values, old money ideal, shapes the image of womanhood that, yes, as mentioned before, does not align with what I believe in, but it also tends to create certain boxes and certain beauty standards. And I know for a fact I'm aware of this fact that I might not quite appear what old money aesthetic captures women to be like, if this makes sense. And as much as I hold some sort of authority, and by that I mean my sister looks up to me now, if she follows this trend, I'm worried. Not that I'm worried she's not going to look up to me anymore, but I do not want my sister. I do not want my sister to, perhaps it's a fear of getting disappointed in me, or perhaps it's a fear of us getting into a lot of disagreements and misunderstandings. Yes, traditional wife narrative doesn't just limit women's economic freedom. That's I'm surely not exaggerating this and dragging and being like, oh, my sister's definitely going to absorb it and 100% follow into this trap, and then she's going to have a limited economic freedom in the future. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? This might happen. This might not happen. But it also, this trad wife narrative imposes a narrow and exclusionary view of womanhood that could alienate those who don't conform. Gender ideologies like these can divide people into rigid categories, those who do conform to traditional norms and roles and those who reject them. And this creates in-groups and out-groups and could drive a wedge, basically, between my sister and I, and that's what I'm worried about. Oh, but Daria, why would you create this video instead of talking to your sister? Just go talk to her. You know, here are a couple of more things that I would like to say. For starters, I find it to be quite challenging. We do have a 9-year age gap, and that's not to say that, oh, if I had a sister or siblings who have 2 or 3 year age gaps, they have it easier or it's simpler for them to communicate and relate to each other. This isn't me saying that, but I say that a 9-year age gap creates a different dynamic that I might have with my sister compared to someone who has a 2 or 3 year age gap with their siblings, right? And I feel like my danger, my worry is that I don't want to be, how do I approach the subject? How do I talk to her in a way that sort of gently guides her? Instead of sitting her down and telling her, this is what I'm worried about, you shouldn't be doing that, this is oppressive, this is not the right way to do. I don't want to be this kind of person who tells her that what she's doing is wrong. I want her to arrive at these conclusions by herself independently. I want to gently guide her, perhaps by creating a dialogue or a discussion where I'm going to ask her these questions and try to point out at the flaws that this aesthetic, this system, these traditional gender roles might have. But it's very easy, I feel like, for me to be dismissed, or rather in general, that's what a lot of adults sort of like, or I don't want to make this claim actually, but at least I found that I've struggled with my siblings that, well, I don't, how do I engage? How do I create this discussion? What do I do? And of course I talk to my sister. Of course we do talk, and I've raised these questions and concerns, but also don't want to be imposing my view upon her. I want her to discover and figure it all out on her own. Of course, she's capable. This isn't me saying she's not capable of critical thinking. Of course, she's capable of critical thinking. But it's just like, I think that teenagers are still, and that's based on my experience, and I hope people can relate to that as well. Teenagers are still very vulnerable to influence, especially when they're not encouraged to actively engage with these ideas. One show that I've binge watched recently that doesn't necessarily talk about the exact subject that I've just discussed, but it showcases what teenagers are dealing with, specifically like internet culture wise. The show is called The Adolescence or Adolescence, and it's on Netflix. And I do encourage people, if they have any free time or any desire to go and watch it, please do. I think it really highlights what teenagers are going through right now and how the internet culture, what kind of impact it has on them. All right, I don't know if the lighting's off, but I'm going to try to be brief with my conclusion, but these are some thoughts and anxieties that I have. And I'd like to, I wanted to share them with you guys in hopes to facilitate some sort of a discussion, a discourse. But it's just like, I don't want to be this adult who's like, oh, the internet's bad. The internet's really bad for you. Look at all these like bad things that it has. No, the internet's not bad. We can't just deny other aspects that are good about the internet. Basically, to recapitulate, restate what this video was all about, I think it's just the discussion of how the internet aesthetics and these ideological trends shape our desires and self-perceptions, and understanding why we're drawn to them, to these certain aesthetics, can help us recognize when something is being not only just like marketed as empowering, but its in actuality is a tool of control, but rather just in general recognize how these ideologies can be really harmful towards us. Obviously, it's in my opinion that it is harmful. It's for you to decide whether or not it is. I understand that this video is not like an hour-long discussion, and it is short. I haven't addressed counterpoints in this video, which I want to say out loud now. It's sort of a limitation of this video essay that it doesn't necessarily address any other points, but I just wanted to share my thinking process, basically my ideas and my reaction, my older sibling perspective on this trend and what I saw in it and how I was, I guess, also captivated by it. And then these are the books that I've read. I didn't do like specific research for it. I just connected these dots, linked all these quotes that I had in my mind based from, my previous readings, basically. So, yes, I guess I want to end with an open-ended question about how can we teach younger people to recognize when an idealized image of empowerment is in fact a method of control. I think that would be an interesting question to explore. But this is all that I have, and I hope you've enjoyed this discourse. I hope you enjoyed my first video essay. I genuinely think it was a little bit chaotic, but hopefully if I were to continue doing this, I will figure it out. Please cut me some slack. As mentioned before, hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think of this. Please share your thoughts, opinions, and comments down below. I'd love to read them. I'd love to know what you have to think about this, whether you agree or disagree. But hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching it to the end. And yeah, have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye.